My uncle has lived in Russia for more than 2 decades. From time to time, I used to travel there for holidays since early childhood. He lived in a rural area not too far from the city of Moscow. He had a small farm, cows, pigs, chickens, and such. I was 19 when I went to visit my uncle for the summer break. Since I was old enough to help him around the place and I had a driver's license. Because of this, my uncle asked me to get into a truck and take hay back to the farm, from the plot of land that he used to grow and get ready hay for the winter. He had to keep feeding 2 cows, and without hay, it would be almost impossible to keep cattle during the winter. I would have to make a few trips to drive all these stacks of hay from the plot to the home. But as a motivation, my uncle promised to let me borrow his car for the night to hang out with friends. We made a deal, and the first trip came and went without any incidents. It wasn't a big distance between the plot and the farm, maybe 25 kilometers at the most. But loading and unloading the truck took a long time by myself, so the second time I took the trip, it was already well past sunset. I was driving a truck back to the farm full of another load of hay, when suddenly on the road, a man appeared out of nowhere. He was smiling and holding up a 1,000 ruble bill in hopes of catching a ride. You ever get a feeling when something is out of place but you can't quite put your finger on it? Well, I had that weird feeling and decided to play it safe and fair. I didn't stop, and I continued my journey back to the farm for my uncle. I felt a bit guilty for leaving that man there, but in my defense, I was a 19-year-old girl driving a car that wasn't even mine, and loaded with tons of hay, which does cost quite a bit of money. I didn't want to risk not only getting hijacked but also maybe something worse. With such a thought, I calmed my conscience, and in a few minutes, I forgot the encounter entirely. Not much after, I heard a weird noise coming from the backside of the truck. Something was hitting against the truck bed door, and I got scared that I might have thrown all the hay without knowing it. I stopped the car and I got out, looked back and checked the door, the latches, crawled under, but everything seemed fine to me. I shrugged and returned back to the cabin. I was about to open the door and get inside when I saw that old man sitting in the cabin of the truck, smiling at me and holding out the bill of 1,000 ruble. I didn't even hear how he had opened and closed the doors. I almost fell back from sheer shock. How? When? Why? I had thousands of questions lining up in my head. First, how this dude got in here, how he caught up, why was he sitting in my uncle's effing truck? I yelled at him to get out of the truck, but the old man was just sitting there smiling and holding out that dang bill. I yelled at him, threatened, but there was nothing. And standing there outside of my truck, holding the doorknob of the driver's side, I realized that I was scared to death of that man. Luckily for me, I saw the lights of another truck coming my way. I leaned out all the way, holding myself with the doorknob, and I started waving my hand. While the truck was getting closer, I was thinking for myself that I would give this creepy old fart a ride for his life with that bill far up his guts. The truck was almost here, and I decided to look into the cabin of my truck, and I saw that he had now scooted over to the driver's seat, face stuck to the window, and staring at me. I fell off and I landed on my butt from fright, and then I heard the doors of my truck open from the passenger side, and I scrambled up to my feet. The old man walked over. He was still smiling and holding out the bill, but only then I noticed what he held in another hand. A small kitchen hatchet. This wasn't fun and games anymore. I backed away, and just in time, the truck arrived and stopped right beside me. And the men that stopped before me turned and dashed into the forest, away from the road. The driver of the other truck looked over and asked what was wrong. I just yelled, There's a man with a 1,000 ruble bill and a kitchen hatchet in the woods. The dude didn't even get out. He locked his doors and ordered me to do the same. Jumping back into my truck, I locked the doors and waited for a while with the another driver. What we were waiting for, I don't know. Maybe to see him again. Wait and see if he would turn up. And 10 minutes went and the driver of the truck decided it was safe enough now to get out of the cars. We got out, shook hands and lit cigarettes. I told him what happened from the beginning, while I smoked like crazy. The driver, Ilya, I later found out, really was just nodding along and looking around, seemingly looking for some movement from the side of the forest. Butting cigarettes, he advised me to never stop the car no matter what, especially if going at night. He was a long-haul driver and seemingly speaking from experience, so I agreed and bid him goodbye. We got into our own separate trucks and we parted ways. When I got to the farm, I informed my aunt about what had happened, and as expected, she started freaking out. She called my uncle immediately and explained everything, and soon enough, the neighbor boy that was helping all day unloading the truck here in the farm took the keys and drove back to my uncle himself. And to be honest, I was happy that he had relieved me of that duty. I was thinking all night about how that guy caught up with me. I wasn't speeding, but I wasn't crawling either. My only guess was that he ran after my truck and somehow jumped to the back door. He held up for a while and then started to make noises, so I would stop to get out and investigate, which is how it exactly happened. Why was he doing all of this? I can only guess. I'd never met that man ever since, and to this day, I have no idea what all of it was about, or what would have happened if there wasn't some random driver in the right place at the right time. Thankfully, I didn't have a chance to find out. Thank you, Ilya, for amazing timing. I know this is really long, but there's also not really any way of shortening the story. I'm not even sure how to start this story off, but here's a little background. I've had my Instagram for about 5 years. I post pretty simple photos. One's of me, and I'm a photographer and an artist, so a good amount of the pictures that I take as well. I don't have a large following on Instagram, so considering this started about 4 years ago, I probably had about 2,000 followers, and most of them were friends, family, or friends of friends. One day, I posted a screenshot on my private Instagram of someone random viewing my story. I'm not sure what the context was, but it doesn't really matter. Soon after, a friend of mine pointed out that one of the Instagram accounts that were viewing my story had a profile picture that was a photo of my friend, so I immediately went to their account. When I went to their account, I noticed that all of their pictures were one screenshotted from my account, and I immediately started freaking out. They went by a kind of Russianized version of my name, and had around 1,000 followers. I was totally baffled. This account didn't last that long, and was receiving probably more activity than my own account was. I was confused, but I also knew that it was what happened when you had a public Instagram, and some catfish isn't going to ruin my life, so I reported the account and I moved on. Soon after, I started getting messages from random Instagram accounts that all seemed to be coming from Russia. They would send me messages and screenshots of different accounts that also all seemed to be Russian, of people pretending to be me. I started to panic more, as I knew that not only was it not just one person, but that many people knew about it, and I genuinely thought that I was a completely different person than I was. I kept reporting these accounts and they would mysteriously delete, and then show up under new names. But at this point, my Instagram account was blocked by pretty much all of the catfish accounts. I logged into a friend's Instagram and noticed tagged photos of this catfish of me. Drawings, many drawings, people drawing me, who they totally thought was some random Russian girl. There was a Twitter account, a YouTube account, a VK, a Russian-based social media account, a Facebook account, all under this fake name and using photos of me. I finally got a lot of the accounts deleted and I felt relieved. Then probably about 6 months later, I got another message on Instagram from some other random Russian account, sending me to yet another fake profile pretending to be me. The first thing that stuck out to me was the fact that they had a photo of my mom and I from when I was a baby. A photo that was only available on my mom's Facebook, which isn't public. I panicked, reported the account, and told all my friends to do the same. And then I got curious, and I started wondering who these people were that were finding and sending these accounts. I went deep back into my Instagram DMs and found that those accounts were now also catfishes of me. I don't know what part of me thought that it would be a good idea to message them, but I did. I ended up having a very odd conversation with them, where they told me that they used the photos of me because I looked like them, and that they were self-conscious. They even said that they would show their family photos of me and pretend that it's them. One day, I tried to log into my Instagram, and it said that someone in Russia had made numerous attempts to change my password. Freaking insane. Basically, I'll save the time and effort and say that this went on for another 3 years, happening randomly about every 6 months. Finally, there was one account made using my own name. I was so furious and I had completely given up, and a few of my friends had messaged them and told them to delete their account. They then DM'd me, apologized in broken English, and they decided that they were going to turn the account into a fan page. Again, weird. I even got to a point where I was considering calling up the producers of Catfish or something. Literally anything. The fan page was running for probably 3 months, but it seems to me that they have deleted it. I still get weird messages from Russian accounts that seem too similar to the others, but I don't feel as freaked out by it. This whole situation sucks because I was never directly threatened or put in a situation in which I felt like my life was in serious danger, so I couldn't really go to the police. But there were definitely times when I felt like I was being watched too closely for someone who isn't famous or anything near it. I'm not really sure how to end this, because it probably will never end. So, this is my first post. What I'm going to say happened 2 years ago. I was only 10 at the time. Even my parents don't know about what happened, but hanging here and reading other people's stories made me feel the urge to share mine as well. For context, my father, mother, little sister, and me were in Russia, in a very luxurious hostel organized like that. The entrance is a building itself from which you had to take an elevator to access a big park. From this park, you have to walk 3 to 4 minutes to arrive in front of a approximately 30-floor building. It's designed to contain one really big suite per floor. So when taking the lift, you can scan your card, and it will automatically bring you to the floor associated to it. So, the third day of our trip, my parents decided to go on a date together, leaving me and my sister alone in the suite. They had left some cash so that we could order some food, so I ordered it and waited. When somebody finally called to say that it was all ready, I went down to search for the food, and that's when I did my first big mistake. I didn't close the front door, thinking that nobody would come up here, and that I would have a lot of things in my hands, so I wouldn't be able to open it. So I called the lift and I waited. It took way too long. When it was finally here, somebody was in it and I politely said hello, but he didn't answer. He was wearing a red sweatshirt and some Adidas joggers. I pushed the 0 button and the man headed out. The doors were closing when I finally realized my second big mistake. Why the heck did he get out? He shouldn't, since there weren't any other rooms except for my family's on that floor. And that's when I started to panic. I tried to stop the lift, but it wouldn't stop. So as soon as I arrived at the ground floor, I immediately went back up to my room's floor. The front door was wide open, and the absent noise made me feel uncomfortable, assuming that either my sister had been caught or that she was hiding. I went for the second option, because the man was taller than me, which meant that his footsteps must have sounded heavier than mine on the ground, and I believed that my sister's intelligence would figure that out and that she would hide. I finally found her hiding behind one of the sofas crying. She told me that the man was searching in the luggages for valuable items. We played hide and seek with him. The room was really big for almost 30 minutes, and I finally went in my room, and I noticed that my Nintendo Switch had vanished. I called the reception to send some security guys to arrest the man. Luckily, everything went pretty smoothly, and that man turned out to be the son of somebody staying there. One creepy thing that I still think about is that he had a knife on him coming from the kitchen of our suite, showing that he didn't just want to steal some stuff. So, just a warning, this pretext is dark and depressing, and you won't unsee what you read here. If you're in a dark place, skip it. So, poverty breeds extreme measures, especially if the poor decides to mob up, form an echo chamber, that chronically downward spiraling mob mentality. Some might argue that it is where evil could be delivered. In Russia, you see quite sleepy babies with different beggars on the same subway, posing as their kids. They never cry or fuss because they're drugged. They are taken children. You also see grown-up beggars, deformed, missing bits of their legs, arms, eyes, or all of them. In our society, capable adults who can't support themselves are viewed as failures, unworthy of sympathy. Quite a few of them couldn't speak, their tongues missing. Those are the kids that try to tell their stories to strangers. Almost all of them are illiterate, but all of them were taken as children. My story wasn't that bad, not bad at all. It was 1997 and I was 5. My family had taken me on a trip, and as we were walking down a major commercial district, I saw 4 young men walking towards us, side by side, all fashionable and metropolitan looking. It's a busy street in midday, crowded indeed, but it's wide enough for 10 people to walk shoulder to shoulder, so they have no need to walk toward our side of the street. But they did. The place is a shopping district with plenty to see. My dad was walking on the right, my mom in the middle, loosely holding my hand. As men, I've mentioned, were just walking past us, I felt a firm grasp on my left forearm. They kept walking, as if nothing happens. My parents kept scrolling through the shops. I was confused by the situation, but I didn't know what to do. So I squeezed my mom's hand as hard as I could. Didn't even think about making a noise. The tug on my arm grew stronger, and I grabbed her hand harder until she turned and looked at me. The arm of the man slipped away. My mom didn't see a thing, as I still couldn't find the words to describe what happened. Years later, as I was in college, I told her this story. Like I said, it wasn't nearly as bad as many of the things I've heard or seen. But that day, I was that close to being taken and never seen again. Fort Bragg, California is a small beach town northwest of Sacramento. It has a kind of Stephen King feel to it. You know what I mean, that misty, almost eerie small harbor town. But it's beautiful and a huge tourist attraction. You get people from all over the US that travel here, My fiance and I decided to drive up here after I had to take some time off of work due to stress. It was a last-minute decision and we packed up our bags in less than 10 minutes, grabbed our dog and took off. If we wouldn't have had our dog with us, I'm pretty sure that I would have lost her. I guess this is where I tell the story, right? It's our second day here right now, and we are staying at a motel that overlooks the ocean. You can see the fog roll in during the early hours of the morning, and watch the fishing boats leave the harbor to go get their haul for the day. It really is a beautiful thing to see. We woke up early and I was craving, and I mean craving, eggs and bacon. After getting dressed and deciding what spot to stuff our faces at, we left for our morning adventure. So here's where I made my mistake. I was driving down the road and it looked like the stop that we crawled up to was a 4-way stop sign. I guessed wrong, because when I pulled out and cut off a small Ford Ranger with a dinky trailer attached to it and 2 old men driving, I realized it was a little too late that I had cut them off. They threw up their hands and pointed at me, but Lily didn't even notice it. I threw my hands up in a, "Sorry, I'm just a dumb tourist" kind of way, and they just stared me down. It was a hillbilly standoff that George Strait would have been proud of. I didn't think much of it and kept driving down the foggy 2-lane road to get breakfast. I didn't even think to say anything to her about it. I never thought that I would see them again, and I didn't want her to complain about me not knowing how to drive. I was wrong though. I was wrong, and I'll never forget what happened next. We got back to the motel after a not so great but overly expensive breakfast. We cuddled up and talked about our plans for the future and what we wanted to do in life. But midway through our conversation, she realized that we were out of dog food to feed Bruce. I agreed to going up to the cute but creepy market and grabbing a bag of goodies. I kissed her on the cheek and jumped in the Navy. We called our navigator Navy. I left and got about halfway to the store before I realized that I had forgotten my wallet on the nightstand. When I pulled back into the parking lot, I saw it. That same Ford Ranger with the janky trailer attached to it. The only difference was that Hank and Boomhauer weren't inside of it. I don't remember seeing them here last night, I thought. I walked up to our door while looking over my shoulder wondering, what are the chances these guys are staying here? And then not 2 seconds later, my heart started beating faster. Our motel door was open but barely cracked. It was open slightly to the point where you could see a sliver of light but nothing more. I slowly pushed it open and looked inside, but I didn't see anything. Lily and Bruce were both gone. It was like they were never even there. My heart started racing, and I dropped my keys on the floor and ran outside, heart pounding in my chest faster than a jackhammer in New York. I didn't see the creepy old guys from the Ford truck or Lily outside. I was becoming angry and frantic by this point. Come on, where did you guys go? I thought before the screaming inside my head was cut off by the sound of familiar barking. I heard Bruce barking and I ran. I ran faster than I ever have in my entire 28 years of life. I ran straight over to the front office where the sound was coming from, and that's when I saw her and our dog inside the office. She was crying, sitting on the floor sobbing uncontrollably, and his hair was standing straight up until he saw that it was me sprinting towards them. Lily got up and ran into my arms. Meanwhile, the clerk is on the phone and I'm wondering, what the heck happened in the 2 minutes that I was gone? This is what happened, told by her, and it makes my body run cold. It turns out as soon as I left, not 30 seconds went by and those inbred guys knocked on the door. Lily opened it up thinking that it was me forgetting my wallet, which I did, and they tried to force their way into the room saying, "You can thank your boy toy for what's coming to ya," while grabbing her and covering her mouth. But those guys didn't realize one thing, and that's that we had a dog in our back seat when I cut them off. Bruce jumped off the bed and didn't hesitate to bite the one grabbing her, and they kicked him and tried to shake him off, but he wouldn't let go. After being bit and realizing that the noise would draw attention if they didn't leave, they ran off and Lily was able to sprint to the front office and wait for help while Bruce followed suit. I wasn't there and I couldn't protect her. If we would have found a dog sitter and our plans weren't last minute, she could be gone right now. But my dog was there and he did exactly what a good boy, no, the best boy would do. And for that, he truly is my best friend. If he wasn't there, what would have happened? Would she have been taken, killed, or all the above? The craziest thing is that they haven't been caught yet. We filed all the reports with the local sheriff. I told them what had happened earlier that morning, and the cop looked right at me and said, "You're lucky your dog was there. If he wasn't and they got in there with her, you could have been filing a different report right now." I got tears in my eyes at that. I looked over at Lily and Bruce and thanked God that I had rescued him from the pound, because in return, he rescued the love of my life when I couldn't. This happened a long time ago. I was around 5 or 6, but it comes up every once in a while at family gatherings, and though it isn't as bone-chilling as some of the stories on here, I figure that it fits well enough. For context, I have a very close extended family, as in a huge family that all lives within 30 minutes of each other. We all live in the suburbs of a large city, far enough away that it is generally considered a safe area with neighbors all knowing each other, and car doors are left unlocked in the driveway. When I was young, my grandma used to watch my cousin and I at the same age, and she had 2 dogs. Dog 1 was Benji, a sweet, lovable dog. Dog 2 was Cheyenne. She was nice enough, but we always preferred Benji as he was nicer, more playful, and just generally wanted to be around us more. We would always play in the backyard with each other, sometimes with supervision and sometimes not. It was a fenced-in yard, and like I said, a nice enough area. Nothing strange at all. Anyway, one day, we're playing outside as per usual. Benji is inside with Grandma. Cheyenne was outside but just laying away from us, as we played with our cars or whatever we were messing with that day. We didn't notice until he started talking, but once he speaks, we notice an older man, maybe 50 or something, trying to talk to us through the fence, no more than 20 feet away. He seems nice enough, but hey, I was young so I had no clue. We kind of walk over to him, but not very close, about 6 feet from the fence. He's talking to us about God knows what, and this whole time Cheyenne had started coming over by us and growling lowly. We didn't think much of it and kept talking. I can't remember what the subject of conversation was. All I know is that at one point he began to try to call us over to him, and to which we wouldn't. We knew that much at least. He was getting upset, and at that point he started to climb over the fence. I have never been so afraid of a dog in my life. Cheyenne starts going absolutely berserk, as in if he had gotten over the fence, I don't think Cheyenne would have let him leave the yard alive. He jumps back, and my grandma hears this happening, so she rushes out to the yard and sees the guy, us, and the dog going insane. She starts screaming like I have never heard her scream before, as he runs away and down the road. We ended up being rushed inside, where Grandma sat us down very nicely and explained the stranger danger thing again. My grandma had no idea who it was. It wasn't a neighbor. The whole time the rest of the day, Cheyenne would not leave our sides. I was always a little scared of Cheyenne after that. I know now that it wasn't fair to her. She was only protecting us. After that, I learned that I will always trust my dogs. We've had dogs as long as I can remember, and I will trust any of them over any person every time. I have no idea what he was planning on doing if he got in the yard, and Cheyenne hadn't been there. So, mister, stay away. And I'm sorry for being cold to you, Cheyenne. Please rest in peace. This incident happened in the summer of 2015. I lived by myself in a nice house inside a small town. Low crime, but still the occasional shady guy. Anyway, I'd worked that day on a smoke break. I watched a dog get thrown from a moving vehicle. 4-lane city traffic during the start of rush hour. I ran out there to scoop the little guy up and booked it back to my workplace. He wasn't injured, amazingly. As an animal lover, I decided to take him home with me until I could figure out what to do with him. I have a large amount of cats, and I always have. This was my first experience with a dog that I was solely responsible for. Now, this guy was very shy. Head hung, tail tucked, jumpy. Just looking at me like I was about to do something to him. I was clueless on the subject of dog personalities and tendencies. I just knew that they needed to be taken out frequently. His first night with me, we had been out about 15 times, as I didn't want him doing it in my house. I was having the final cigarette of the day on my porch around 10:30. The dog was on a lead, chilling under my chair as I smoked and poked about on Reddit. I see a man walking on the sidewalk that runs by my house. He kept glancing up at me before passing. Shortly after he passed my house, he stopped, turned on his heel and approached. "Hey, can you tell me where 302 Church Street is?" he asked. I told him that I would look it up on my phone, which of course was taking a minute to pull up. He explained that he didn't have a phone of his own and he was attempting to get to a friend's house, taking small steps towards me the entire time. Finally, the address I summoned came up. "Hey, it's exactly 2 blocks north of here, right on the southwest corner of the cross street," I told him, pointing in the direction. He kept his eyes locked on me, continuing to slowly move closer. The doggo starts growling very softly at this point. I had forgotten he was even there until now. "Mind if I take a look at the map?" He grinned sheepishly. I'm bad with directions. I rose from my seat, pointing again. "It's truly just 2 blocks up this road. Just follow the road 2 blocks. The house will be on your left," making it very clear that I wasn't going to just hand him my phone. "Well, can I call them? I need to let them know that I'm coming," he said, still creeping closer, extending his hand. "No," I curtly replied. "How about text him?" Pushing forward still. "Dude, no." I started toward my door. Just let me see your phone." He was visibly becoming upset, clearly trying to contain it, and getting way too close to my porch. As a last-ditch effort of getting this dude to get away from me, I say, "You need to get the heck out of my yard. My dog is protective and he'll mess you up." Heck, I didn't know the first thing about this dog, let alone whether he had the capacity to mess someone up. I just hoped saying so would intimidate the pushy phone guy. Like I had said the magic words, the pupper springs into action. A la the wolf creature from the never-ending story, he emerges like a bullet from under the chair, growling and snarling, barking his little butt off. He jerks me near off the porch, trying to get at this guy. He sounded and acted like an 80-pound attack dog, not a 40-pound timid beagle mix. I was afraid. I didn't know if the pup would turn on me. As stated previously, at the time, I knew absolutely nothing about dogs. He backed his hindquarters into my legs, almost nudging me to the door, still carrying on. Eyes locked on phone dude and baring his teeth. Phone dude holds up his hands and backs off. stammers something like, 2 blocks north, yeah? And begins walking that way. I go inside, cut off my lights, and I peek out the window at him. He glances at my house, assured that I'm inside, turns and begins walking the completely opposite direction that I pointed him in. Icing on the cake. He pulls a phone from his pocket and raises it to his ear to make a call. The dog is secured in his place as a member of my family that night. He is incredibly protective of me, and has frightened away another creep since this incident. He is attached at my hip, and has made it known that he is grateful to be in a safe, loving home, wherein he will never again become a projectile from a moving vehicle. His name is Hank, and I truly believe that night would have ended very poorly for me had he not been there. This happened a number of years ago, maybe 10. I used to live in a rather large house in the country. The nearest neighbor was about a quarter-mile away. This house was slightly on a hill, so the top of the driveway was at the top, and the house was at the bottom. We had a few very large pine trees at the base close to the house. They were so dense that you couldn't really see behind them from the top of the driveway. I remember that I was on my bike with my German Shepherd, Baron, R.I.P., in the driveway, and my dad was working on some gardening behind 2 of the large trees. At one point, I had rode to the top of the driveway to ride down the hill, and I saw a golden sedan. I don't remember the make, parked across the road with the front facing me. Inside, I saw 2 men, who were just staring at me. I didn't think anything of it at the time, and I rode down the hill carelessly. A few minutes later, the sedan slowly drove past the top of my driveway, and I saw it and again thought nothing of it. I was a very sheltered child, so much so that I didn't even know what kidnapping was, and if I did, I probably would have been more suspicious. I didn't see the car again for a few minutes, but it came back but the opposite direction, meaning that they had to have flipped a U-turn. This time, the passenger rolled down their window and yelled over to me, "Hey, want to come help us look for our dog? She's lost and only a puppy." However, my dad came out from behind the tree and told me to stay where I was. The men were startled and looked at my dad, 6'2" and pretty large, and simply said that they were looking for a lost dog. My dad asked what kind, and they went quiet, and one said, "Chihuahua." Now, I mentioned that we live in the country, which was also home to hawks, snakes, and coyotes, as well as these men weren't our neighbors. We knew everyone in the street and almost everyone in the neighborhood. The only people that we didn't know lived very far back, almost 5 miles away. There was no way a dog that small could get anywhere near us, and even if it did, it probably would have been eaten by another wild animal anyway. My dad got really close to the window and muttered something. I never really heard what it was, but the men drove off and I've never seen them again. My mom later sent an email to the neighborhood. No one owned a golden sedan or had a chihuahua that had gotten out. After the incident, my parents drilled stranger danger into my head, which has made me the cautious person that I am today. I don't know what had happened if my dad was not there. I love you and I miss you every day. A few years ago, I was renting a house in Northern California. The neighborhood was just outside of the suburbs. It seemed like the perfect balance of having space and having nice neighbors close enough not to feel isolated. The area had no streetlights, so it was very dark at night, especially if there were clouds blocking the moonlight. It didn't bother me though. It made my little house feel even more quaint on dark nights. I got home from work one day in midwinter. It was a cloudy night, so pulling up to my house, I saw only what my headlights and front porch light illuminated. When I got out of my car, I caught a whiff of cigarette smoke. That was odd, as I'd never smelled that before around the house. I didn't see anyone nearby, so I ignored it and went inside. I had just got off a shift with a few hours of overtime, so I felt pretty tired, even though it wasn't even 7 p.m. yet. I decided to take a shower and call it a night. I woke up sometime later, sure that I'd heard a noise inside of my house. I wasn't worried right away because my friend would sometimes stop by to use my shower after work on his way to his night classes. I even gave him a spare key, so that he could stop by even if I wasn't home. He would always text me to let me know beforehand though, and I hadn't heard my phone go off. I reached over to my bedside table, picked up my cell phone to see if my friend had sent me any messages. The bright light from my phone screen and number pad blinded me. These were the days before phones had a light sensor that would dim the screen in the dark. And this particular phone was so bright that I could use it as a flashlight. Through squinted eyes, I could make out that it was 9-something, but I couldn't tell if I had an unread text or not. I set my phone aside and I called out my friend's name. There were a couple of seconds of silence before I heard loud footfalls as someone started running through the bottom floor of my house. I leapt out of bed and I ran to the closet. They were already up the stairs by the time that I had opened the door and stepped inside. That house had 3 rooms upstairs, 2 bedrooms on either side of the hallway, the one that I was in and a spare, and a bathroom at the end. The bedroom doors were both closed, but the bathroom door was cracked open. I heard whoever was in my house thunder down the hallway past my door and into the bathroom. Thank God he did. That gave me enough time to open the attic access in the ceiling of my closet and hoist myself up. I had just started to lift myself up when the person ran back out of the bathroom. My feet were barely inside of the attic when my bedroom door had bursted open. I heard footsteps run into my room and stop. When they didn't see me in that room, they ran back to the hallway and into the other room, which just had boxes stacked in a corner, some weights, and a table where I painted miniature models. I guess they decided that if someone were hiding, it would be in the bedroom because they charged back into the room and turned on the light. A moment later, the closet door was ripped open. I was crouched in my attic, just a foot or so away from the access, so I could try to stop them if they started to climb up. From my vantage point, all I could see was from about their knee down. They were wearing dirty blue jeans with frayed cuffs and worn work boots. After a few seconds of looking in the closet, they stepped away, and I heard a loud crash come from my room, followed by a scream of frustration and anger. That scream was the most unnerving part of the incident for me. It reminded me far too much of my stepfather, who would scream in a similar way when he lost his temper. He would eventually be put in a mental hospital for several mental disorders that resulted in erratic and violent tendencies. The man in my house ran back down the stairs. I heard crashes and clatters as things were thrown around and furniture was knocked over. I stayed crouched in the attic. I had left my cell phone when I ran for the closet, and I wasn't certain I could climb down without him hearing. After some time, the noises stopped. I started counting slowly. When I reached 1,000, I decided that it was safe enough to climb down and call the police. The first thing that I noticed when I exited the closet was the intruder had flipped my bed over, I assume in an attempt to find me. That was the loud noise that I'd heard after he had stepped away from the closet. I couldn't find my cell phone, so I went to the landline by the bed and I called the police. I waited in my room until I heard them call out from downstairs. The first floor was a mess, but I'd expected that. Chairs had been knocked over, the sofa had been flipped. All the books and pictures and knickknacks I had on my shelves were strewn across the floor. The cupboards in the kitchen had been opened and all the boxed canned foods had been thrown to the ground. As far as I could tell though, the only thing missing was a single knife out of the wooden block in my kitchen. The police checked the house from top to bottom. They found that the side door had been forced open by something like a crowbar. They also found a few cigarette butts along my fence line, along with some foil and an empty pen tube, which the police said people often use to smoke. So they think he had been watching my house for a while. I realized that he must have been out there smoking a cigarette when I got home. They collected up the evidence and told me that I should stay with family or friends that night and get that door fixed as soon as possible. I opted to just not sleep. I moved a shelf over to block the broken door, and I spent the next couple of hours cleaning things up. I would often go to the window with a flashlight and shine it along the fence line where the police found these cigarette butts and foil, but I didn't see anything. The next day, I called to have the door fixed and the motion lights installed at the back and sides of my house. I ran a phone cable up into the attic, and I added a landline. I never wanted to be stuck up there without a phone again. Nothing else ever happened at that house though. I lived there for another 3 years without any incident. One more precaution I took was practicing getting out of my bed, going to my closet, and climbing into the attic as quickly and quietly as possible. I even kept at it when I moved, except now I go to a crawl space at the back of the closet instead of the attic. I try not to think about what would have happened if I had been a bit slower at getting to the attic, or if he hadn't gone into the bathroom at the end of the hallway first. This happened 2 summers ago, while I was house sitting out in California for an older couple that I had met at a conference for work. It had seemed like a dream scenario. The couple wanted a vacation in Hawaii for 2 weeks, but they didn't want to board their cats, and I had been chatting with them about wanting to visit California again, where they happened to live, because I had loved it the first time that I went there, and we figured that we could mutually benefit if I came out and I house sat for them. So I flew out there and they showed me around for a few days, taught me how to care for the cats, 2 of them, one that was extremely shy and that I barely saw, which is important later, and their plans. They gave me access to their house and cars. These people were pretty generous, and before I knew it, I had dropped them off at the airport and I was on my own. At first, it really was the dream vacation. I was staying in Oakland and making forays into San Fran, Sonoma, and Monterey. In the mornings, I could walk out the front door and shortly be hiking the pass surrounding nearby Mount Diablo, and I was just ultra content with the world. I was so enamored by the area that I had actually started looking into taking some steps to relocate out there, even. But then one day, about halfway through my final week there, when I got back to the house, I felt really odd, almost like I shouldn't be going inside. I shook it off and I went inside anyway. It was getting late and I needed to put out dinner for the cats. Once I was inside, I forced myself to ignore how off I felt, and I made some food for myself and went to bed. And I was shocked to find the shy cat hiding under my bed and crying. This was the first time that I had even seen her close up. The entire time that I had been there up to that point, she never left my host's bedroom, unless she didn't realize that I was around. Again, I ignored feeling weird, and just assumed that she decided that I was okay and went to bed. I did start locking my bedroom door that night though. I also remember that about halfway through that night, I thought that I heard someone walking around in the gravel outside of my window. But after listening for a bit, I didn't hear anything else and I went back to sleep. The day after in the morning, I still felt a little odd, but I kept up with my plans for the day. I drove out to a little music festival in Sonoma and went clothes shopping and had an overall great day. When I got back to the house though, I found the front door locked in a way that I hadn't left it. Basically, my host never locked the deadbolt, only the lower second lock, and that's the only lock that my key worked on, so I never messed with the deadbolt, but it was definitely locked. So, I had to call my host and find the hideaway key, which, to their credit, safely wise, was buried like a whole foot underneath a bush outside, and had definitely not been unearthed for a long time. So I used that and went inside, and kept the key with me just in case it happened again. And it did it, but with a different door. This time, I had stepped out into the garage to get a drink, and when I turned around to go back into the house, the door was shut and locked. I could use my normal key on that door, but I was still pretty bewildered. My own cats are pretty whack, but I think in my mind that I was trying to come up with a way that the cats could be locking me out of the house, but I kept coming up empty. I decided that I must have been misunderstanding how the locks worked, and I just wrote it off and started checking and triple checking locks when I went out of the house or out into the garage. That night when I went to bed, the really awful feeling of unease was still there, and so was the shy cat, who was clearly unhappy to see me, but also wouldn't leave the room. But again, I just locked my bedroom door and went to sleep. The next morning I felt awful, nausea, body ache. I had no desire to leave the house, so I decided to stay in and Netflix for a day. This vacation stay was like a full 2 weeks, so I didn't feel like I was in any hurry to get all my touristy things in anyways. But as the day went on, I started to get that feeling of wrongness again, and it morphed into a feeling of being incredibly watched. Around mid-afternoon, it got to the point that I was so uneasy that, even feeling awful, I decided to get out of the house for a bit to shake it off. I was getting a bit low on food, so I went to the grocery store and bought a couple food items that I didn't think would hurt my stomach, and as I started to leave the checkout, the cashier said the generic, "Have a great evening," and I just instantly started crying, shocking myself and that poor cashier, because I just had this intrusive thought that said, "You might be the last person to ever say that to me." When I got to my car, I was still crying and my entire body was telling me not to drive back to the house. I couldn't not though, because I didn't want to neglect the cats. So I drove back, parked in the driveway, and convinced myself after about half an hour to just go open the front door. Once I did that, I thought that I would get over it and be able to go in and at least feed the cats, and then maybe I would get a hotel room after. But my body physically would not let me inside. It was like I was stuck in the entryway. I then made a deal with myself. I would yell into the house saying that I had already called the police and that they were on their way. In panic logic, I figured that would make anyone in the house leave. So I faced the inside of the house, looking down the hallway towards the bedrooms, and I did just that. The second that I had finished saying, "They're almost here, so if you want to avoid being arrested, you need to leave now," the light in my host's room turned on and I heard some banging. I immediately hightailed it back to the car, called the police for real, and proceeded to have a mental breakdown while talking to the dispatcher. Once they got there, they checked the house and they didn't find anyone. But the double doors in my host's bedroom were left wide open, so I'm glad the cats didn't get out. And there was a pile of food wrappers in the corner behind the blinds, so they said it looked like someone had been there. What makes it so scary to me is that nothing was taken, and that based on the shape of the house, that would have been the perfect vantage point to see me in the living room as I stayed home sick. To explain this, the house was in an L shape, and from the windows into the garden that were in my host's bedroom, you could see into the living room windows. Also, the minute that the police were gone, they said they couldn't prove anyone was there. There were no signs of forced entry, and we couldn't get a hold of my host immediately to verify if anything had been taken, which once they were back, they verified that nothing had been taken. So they said that they would patrol for a bit but nothing else. The shy cat was right back in my host's bedroom, and I didn't see her again until I left to go back home at the end of the trip. So, basically, I think the intruder had been there at least 2 days, forcing her to choose between two strangers, and leading her to choose the one that was at least a little less strange, being me. This all messed me up pretty badly, especially because they didn't catch the person and didn't seem to have any desire to look, and I still had to stay in that house for the next 3 days. Luckily, nothing else odd happened, and I didn't feel anything off the rest of the time that I was there, but by then, the damage had already been done. I've never felt completely safe in a home without doing a complete search before bed since then. But I am extremely glad that my gut spoke up. I guess I would rather have some residual anxiety than be dead. Back in late 2016, I, a female then 23, was moving from NYC to Boston. 2 of my college friends, also female, agreed to live with me and we started looking for an apartment. We were fond of one place in particular out in the suburbs next to a forest park. I got to talking with the landlord, an older man probably in his 70s, and mentioned that I repair antique dolls. He excitedly said that he had a doll his mother's uncle had brought her back from Germany in World War I, and the elastic holding the arms on had worn out. I said that I could definitely fix it and we exchanged contact info. He was firm that my work would have to take place at his house since he was nervous about moving a fragile antique, but at the time I didn't think anything of it. Now that I'm older and wiser, I know doll doctor house calls are not the norm. Ultimately, we went with another place closer to the city proper, but I didn't want to lose a prospective doll repair client. I called him a week or so after we got settled in, and once again, he seemed delighted to get his family heirloom fixed. Nothing seemed odd until I asked for his address to work out how to get there. "Oh, don't worry about it," he said. "I'll pick you up. What's your new address?" My eagerness cooled a little. I tried to put him off by saying that I didn't want to bring him out of his way and that I could get myself there no problem, but he kept insisting. Never even told me what town that he lived in. Just repeated over and over again that it was fine, that he would pick me up and it would be no trouble at all. Eager for the business and a bit embarrassed about my paranoia, I finally caved. I told him my address and we arranged a date and a time for him to pick me up. Over the next few days, literally everyone in my life told me to call and cancel. My housemates asked if I had lost my mind. My mom and sister both told me that I was driving them mad with worry. To be honest, I think I was looking for an excuse to call the whole thing off. It just didn't feel right. I called the evening before the appointment day and left a message saying that something had come up. I added that if he was free the following Monday, my housemate could drive me over, so that he wouldn't be inconvenienced, which was true. She had offered in a last-ditch effort to make me see sense. The next day, the time we had picked rolled around. I was sitting in the living room working on a sewing project when a car pulled up in front of the house. I looked down, and my heart jumped when I recognized the old man sitting in the driver's seat. He didn't look up, didn't appear to see me, just sat there what felt like a century until finally, he started the car and drove off. I never saw him again. He never contacted me about getting his mother's precious doll repaired. And maybe I was overreacting to an innocent old guy with poor social skills who forgot to call back. But I had a bad feeling about the situation and ultimately think that I did the right thing. The part that creeps me out the most is, I almost had this man for my landlord. I could have been fine, or it could have been much, much worse. This past New Year's was mine and my boyfriend's 4-year anniversary. We typically don't do much, so this year we decided to make it special by planning a romantic getaway. At the time, the two of us were living in Seattle and wanted to rent a cabin in a snowy, small town for the weekend. We found a cabin on Airbnb with a hot tub and we were sold. The cabin was, of course, the last house on the road. To get to it, you had to drive down a small, removed, private road that ended in a roundabout. Off the roundabout was a long uphill driveway leading up to the cabin. We got to the cabin and it was snowy and beautiful. The cabin itself sat on top of a garage and you needed to take stairs on the backside of the property to get to the front door. When we got inside, there was a booklet with all of the cabin's info outlined. The book said that during the snowy season, don't be surprised if their contracted snowplowers showed up to clear off the driveway. Okay, sounds good. We unpacked and realized that there was no service on either of our phones, but the booklet told us that there was a landline in the cabin if we needed anything. We spent the first night by the fire playing board games and drinking wine. The weekend was exactly what we needed. We planned to spend the next day in town, and that night, I had booked us a reservation for a nice dinner. We were gone almost all day, only returning briefly to get dressed up to enjoy some good food. Dinner was great, and we were excited to head back to the cabin for some champagne hot tubbing. While at dinner, the temperature had dropped and it snowed for the first time that day, coating everything in a fresh layer of powder. We drove down the private road and got to the driveway. At that point, my boyfriend stopped the car, headlights shining in front, and asked if I noticed the new tire tracks. I looked at the driveway, hoping to quickly disregard the new tire tracks, but they were there. Immediately, we remembered that the snowplowers could have stopped by. But the issue was that we saw the tire tracks because of the snow and who plows in the dark. We also knew that once we were at the cabin, that we had no service on our cell phones. So we figured that we would head back into town and message our Airbnb host and ask them if one of their friends had stopped by the apartments. We waited for a while in town for a reply from our host but didn't hear back. We could have called, but at that point it was past 10 and we didn't want to be bad guys. We figured that we blew the whole thing out of proportion, and that we might as well head back to the cabin. After all, I am a big true crime fan, and I like spooky subreddits and horror movies, so I was probably just psyching myself out. My boyfriend drove us back, and this time, we actually drove up the driveway. Towards the top of the hill, the part of the driveway, I noticed something. My stomach dropped as I noticed footprints on the property. We backed on the driveway and took a closer look to see if there were more footprints. From what it looked like, someone had driven up the driveway, reversed down part, and then got out of the car and walked onto the property. Since we had now also driven on the tracks that we couldn't find where the footprints ended, The property was quite large with tons of trees and brush, and we knew that these footprints could go anywhere. The moment that we saw footprints, we decided to call the police. We figured that it was better safe than sorry. We would just have the officer go into the property with us to check everything out. We drove back down the road until we were able to get service, called the police, and waited for their arrival. A policeman showed up and we followed him onto the property. The officer scanned the property and determined that no one was out there. Obviously, we're a little shaken up and a lot embarrassed, and we thanked the officer as he left. Needless to say, neither of us wanted to sit in the hot tub in the dark woods after what had happened. Instead, we locked the doors up and watched a movie, champagne-less. We were both tired from the day and we passed out pretty quickly. At 3 a.m., we both woke up on the couch with the TV on and all the lights, laughing about how the night didn't turn out as planned. As my boyfriend went to brush his teeth, we heard a noise. It sounded mechanical and it only lasted a few seconds. We looked at each other and froze. The garage door. There are very few reasons that someone would need to open the garage door of a guest-occupied Airbnb at 3 in the morning. Like I said, we woke up to all the lights on and the cabin had lots of windows. We knew that if someone was outside, they knew we were here and they could see us. I immediately grabbed the landline and I dialed 911. We sat crouched in the Airbnb, praying for the police to arrive. We knew that whoever had made those tracks were still on the property, and this time they were making noise. As I sat talking to the operator, we heard a bang in our balcony as if someone threw something up onto it. I was losing my mind when the operator told me that the police were nearby. All of a sudden, they were there. We saw the police lights and watched them search the property. Soon, we heard a banging on the door and it was the police and we were okay. At the door were 2 policemen, one in front of us and one a little behind, kind of kicking around snow and looking at the ground. I immediately noticed that the police officer in the back asked the officer that did the initial check on the property. The police officer told us that not only was the garage door shut, but it was locked. And again, there were no signs of anyone on the property. We discussed leaving, but the police officer said the road conditions were too dangerous that time of night. I looked at the police officer who had come out to the property twice, and I felt that I had deeply disappointed him. My boyfriend and I went back inside, again locking all the doors and trying to fall asleep. The next day we were leaving, and while we survived the night, I didn't feel right in the cabin anymore. It was forever the spooky cabin in my head, and I wanted to leave. As we packed up, we heard the same noise that we had heard at 3 a.m. Oh, it was the heater. A heater that sounds just like a garage that sounds lasts the same duration. My boyfriend looked at me and immediately said, "You need to give up your murder shows," and walked away. As if. As for the banging on the balcony, it was just the perfectly timed fall of a pine cone. I promise I'm not paranoid. I think back on this story a lot and I'm embarrassed about how little came of it, but I'm also incredibly grateful for the same reason. But whoever drove onto the property and walked around, thank you for triggering all of my nightmares. About a year ago, I spent a decent amount of time working in a different city than I currently live in. One day was very cold and the Airbnb that I had booked was pretty far away. I didn't have a car and had failed to pack a warm coat. I ducked into the Kmart nearby to buy something that I could wear on my walk, with the intention of returning it the following morning. My best option was this enormous XXL fuzzy bathrobe. My walk home led me through this beautiful botanic garden along a waterway. It was nearing midnight and I was halfway through my journey. I'm usually quite aware when I'm out, especially at night, but I had let my guard down a bit, due in part to the enormous bathrobe that I had wrapped around me. It was like wearing a fuzzy suit of armor. Suddenly, I felt intensely uncomfortable. I couldn't quite put my finger on what I had heard, but my immediate thought was a couple of males holding a whispered conversation. I rounded a corner and ducked into some trees, sucking my breath in and straining to understand what I was hearing. Light footsteps, voices. Two men neared my hiding spot in the path, and I internally berated myself for not being more careful. Nobody was out, so screaming would do nothing. I'm a very small female, so this situation was one of my worst nightmares. As they passed, I heard, "She's around here somewhere." I felt physically sick, until one of the guys let out a low whistle, and I heard the jingle of a collar, a dog scurrying past my spot, and a good girl followed by smoochy noises. An intense sense of relief followed. They were talking about their beloved dog, not hunting me. They seemed harmless, endearing even. I readjusted my bathrobe to cover my head. It was that cold out, and I popped out from the trees. I didn't realize until later that I looked at myself in the mirror that the bathrobe arms were now on top of my head, sticking out like some grotesque, bulbous monster appendages. I also didn't realize that the men had stopped, or were walking very slowly, only a few meters ahead on the path. One of the men screamed in terror when they saw my emergence from the trees. The other swore loudly, and they both took off running across the bridge over the waterway, followed closely by their dog who was now barking frantically. I still have the picture that I took of myself in the mirror after the incident, and I get the giggles every time I see it. I must admit, it was a rush to finally be on the other end of a situation like this. Okay, so back when I was in the military, I was based out in California. This was pretty much right at the start of the housing bust, and I found myself newly divorced following a deployment. As such, I could no longer live on base and I had to move. I quickly discovered that it was now the same price or cheaper to rent a house instead of an apartment off base, so I got in touch with a realtor who worked with residents of a local gated community. As a newly single female with zero family in the area, I thought extra security could be a good thing. I soon found the perfect house. It was amazing. Had a wraparound porch with a view of the lake and the center of the community. Had trees blocking my views of my neighbors, and an awesome kitchen. I love cooking, and tons of local wildlife. I could easily see myself recovering from what had been an ungodly rough year. The owner mostly lived overseas, though I never really dealt with him except when I moved, but he seemed really nice, if a bit particular. He obviously loved the house, so I didn't think much of that. The two times that I needed something, I looked after his brother and he came to deal with them as he was a handyman of sorts. I always found it a bit weird that him and his brother looked like they could have been twins, to the point where I thought his brother was him when he came to pick up the dryer when it needed fixing. Literally, he picked it up and carried it out in his arms. The funny thing about PTSD brain, though, is that lots of normal things seem weird, while strange things seem normal. So I never really thought of the landlord-brother situation as odd until after that. Maybe it was normal and the whole oddness of what happened is setting off my paranoia, I don't really know. But yeah, landlord odd, brother was apparently the hog. Both spoke to me like I was their kid who needed very strict instructions. Anyway, I enjoyed my time in the house. My Ace pup loved it too because the next door neighbors had dogs for her to play with. But my PTSD and other mental health issues had me on a path headed straight for a medical separation. But then the president issued a series of rollback programs, a chance for military members to separate ahead of contract, in anticipation for the Middle Eastern conflicts to be abandoned. And my commander, Hadi, suggested, if you're military, you know this basically means do this or else, for me to take the early separation. There were a few reasons surrounding this, but the main was that the squadron knew they were the reason I was mentally fracked up, and there were more than a few of the people who had it in for me still at the clinic that I was assigned to. Those people kept writing me up for things that no one else got written up for. Examples of this: accidentally jamming the shredder that jammed at least once a week, leaving the front desk unattended while I was having an anaphylactic attack, having a panic attack which left work unattended because I was literally curled up into a ball in the corner. You get the picture. Of course, my brain took most of this stuff at face value and figured it was okay and that I deserved it. But my commander was trying to protect me as best as she could and get me out of a clearly hostile work environment ASAP. So I applied and I was approved for separation. Now, this meant I was leaving my lease before the year was out. I forgot if my landlord just decided to be nice or if I had to pull out a law about military members being entitled to early release from a lease when their duty assignments changed. Probably the second one because he wasn't happy. I didn't really have the mental capacity to care too much about putting him out though, because my scrambled brains all of a sudden had a lot of military paperwork and processing to deal with. Not to mention the fact that the whole idea that I was separating felt very surreal in the first place. I had always thought I would be a lifer. I didn't tell any of my neighbors that I was moving. Only one of my friends knew when exactly I was moving out. And even my movers didn't know exactly when because I stayed there on an air mattress for about a week after they had picked up my things. I was camping my way across the country on my way home, so I had a lot of stuff to move in my car too. To the best of my knowledge, no one on the base knew exactly when my house would be vacant either, because I actually stayed in a motel off base for a few days after I had moved out, just to make the final days of last-minute paperwork easier. The house was about 40 minutes from my base while the motel was only 10. They knew what my travel plans. I was on separation leave for that time, which meant I was technically still in the military and they needed to know exactly where I was. But I had marked my starting location for the trip as my base and not the house. What you should be getting out of this is that only 2 people for sure knew the exact date that I was leaving the house: my friend and my landlord. He'd likely told his brother and his realtor as well, but I'm not sure. That said, even my landlord didn't know the exact date that I would be leaving the area, just when I would vacate the premises. My landlord had told me to drop my house keys in the realtor's mailbox, so that's what I did. And a few days later, I left on my road trip home. Now, about a day later, I got a phone call from my landlord. I'm on the road with my pup when I answer. The conversation follows. Hey, you left your camera here. Are you sure? Yeah, it's a Nikon with a nice set of lenses and a camera bag. Oh, I don't have one of those. Really? My brother said you did. I try to think back and remember his brother coming over to drop off the dryer while my sister and nephew were in town. She's an avid photographer and I figured she must have had the camera bag out in preparation for our day trip to San Francisco. No, I only use one of those Canons that can fit in your pocket. He must be thinking of my sister's, but she for sure brought that home with her months ago. The landlord is silent for a while before. Well, what about this sleeping bag that's here? No, I definitely have my sleeping bag. Again, the landlord described my sleeping bag. No, I have mine. I slept in it last night. Well, there's a backpack too with a few random items. His tone then changed to accusatory. Did you tell one of your friends you could stay here for the rest of your lease? No. Only one of my friends even knows exactly when I moved out, and he's visiting his wife who is deployed in Korea right now. Well, someone's been living here. At this point, it should have occurred to me how weird it was that he'd gone from friendly, "Hey, you forgot this," to angry, "You let someone squat here so quickly," But it was only just getting through my head that someone had clearly moved in the moment that I moved out. This house didn't have an attic, so this couldn't have been one of those. Someone was living in the attic while I was living there, and moved down into the house after I left. There wasn't a sealed off part of the house where this could be done, and I even went into the basement on a regular basis. It's possible that someone was living in the woods behind the house, but I have no idea. Anyway, my landlord wanted me to come over and check this stuff to make sure that it wasn't mine. I told him that I'd finished up my paperwork, so I was on the road and already in Oregon. He clearly hadn't expected me to already have left the area since I still had a few days on my lease. Yeah, looking back, it should have struck me as weird that he was already in the house, but I figured he had picked up the keys and knew that I was out, and told me that he would have to call me back after he figured things out. He never called back. I texted him later to follow up, but all I got were short or no responses to my questions. No, they didn't know whose stuff it was. No answer when I told him I was freaked out and wanted to know what had happened. Yeah, he had gotten both sets of keys from the realtor, and no, he hadn't found anything else. Not long after I got my full deposit back, which I hadn't been expecting since I felt bad for not staying my whole lease. I hadn't planned on asking for it. It wasn't until relaying this all to my mom later that I realized exactly how weird this whole thing was, or what my landlord might have been making up, the squatter. She pointed out how strange it was that a guy who was supposedly traveling too much to use his own house would show up himself to walk through the house after I left, especially since his brother did everything while I lived there. Neither of us are really sure if he was up to something, or if there really had been some extremely creepy stalker or squatter situation. Either way, the whole thing seriously messed with my already messed up head. A couple of years ago, I flew home to visit family. I would be there for about a week, and then we would head to the coast for a week, and then back home for another week. I totally needed this break. I had just ended an on-again, off-again relationship. Like seriously, one day on and the next off. It took 7 months of putting up with it because you're supposed to fight for what is important to you, right? Anyhow, I finally just said that it was done. No more chances, no trying to work it out, just done. So with that chapter of my life being over, I was more than happy to be somewhere else, surrounded by family, and begin putting myself back together. Got there, spent a couple of days sleeping a lot. My mother's a nurse and she was becoming concerned that there was something physically wrong with me. I just needed a couple days in a safe place, where I could let my brain work on digesting the new life I would have when I got back home. So, before we left for the coast, I met up with a friend from grade school that I had kept in contact with over the years. I thought it would just be he and I, but it didn't really faze me that another person was there. We hung out for a while and then I needed to head home because I had to take a backwoods route to get home, or take a different route that would add another 20 miles onto my track. Being backwoods, I needed to be able to keep an eye out for deer. So I said goodbye and told my friend's friend that if he was ever in my neck of the woods, look me up and we would grab a drink and hang out. I told him to grab my number from my friend and out the door that I went. About halfway home, I get this weird, queasy feeling in the pit of my stomach. So I slowed way down and sure enough, there is a deer in the middle of the road. Because I had slowed down, I could see another car out on the road. I couldn't shake the queasy feeling, so I figured it would be better to cut off and go down the main road, because there were more places to stop. I seriously didn't want to stop in some rural farmer's driveway. I've watched too many movies to make that mistake. So, I get over to the main road and pull into a gas station, and I sit there for a couple of minutes, trying not to get sick to my stomach. I ran into the store, grabbed some water and ginger ale, and came back out to my vehicle, still unable to shake that queasy feeling. So I started to head home from the gas station and knew I didn't want to go straight home. So I drove around, taking this road or that road, until that weird feeling started to go away. And then I went home, read for a bit, and then went to sleep. Next day, everything was fine and we headed off to the coast. Fast forward 2 weeks. The trip is over and I'm still feeling a little bit fragile over the breakup, but that's all. I figured I would begin the process of cleansing the environment of negative energies, and then work through the baggage that came from the breakup. I knew there was a lot and that it would take time. So the next day, I'm going about my business and everything as cool as can be, when picking through the junk left behind after a breakup. I'm really just doing mindless things to zone out and not to have to think too much on the activity, since my brain was working full-time already. A little bit later in the day, my phone rings. I don't get a lot of calls, so I assumed that there might be a family emergency, and that I needed to answer it ASAP. The area code of the caller, who is not in my contacts, is the same as my cousin, so I answered without a second thought. On the other end was my friend's friend, S.A., the acquaintance that I met at my friend's house. It's a little weird to have him be calling me, but I'm not thinking that anything is terribly out of the ordinary. I asked him what was up and he said that he was at the airport. I still find it a little odd but say, "Oh, that's cool. Where are you going?" He said that he had already landed. Again, I'm distracted and really just want to get him off the phone so I could go back to my mental sidestep and zone out while my brain chugged away. So I said that I hoped that he had a good time wherever he was. He said that he needed me to pick him up. "What? Did you say you needed me to pick you up?" "Yeah," he replied. "I came to visit you." I paused there for a second. I know for a fact that I didn't show any more interest in him than general courtesy. Even the tossed over-the-shoulder look-me-up comment was one of those polite things to say because you never actually plan on seeing them again. "Why did you come to visit me?" I asked. He said that he felt a deep connection and wanted to be with me. I'm starting to get angry as well as freaked out at this stage. I told him that I didn't feel the connection at all, and couldn't believe that he would fly across country to see someone that he had spent maybe 2 hours with. He said that I had invited him when I said to look him up. I said, "No, I don't think so. That's just a polite thing to say to some random person that has made a very small impression on me." He said that he needed to find a way back home then since I had misled him. Misled him? What the heck? Look me up if you're ever in my neck of the woods had led him to think that was the basis for any sort of encounter that was meaningful. He said that he needed a place to stay until he could get the money for a plane ticket back. I said that there were more than enough hotels that he could stay at while he got himself sorted out. He said that he didn't have any money after buying the random one-way plane ticket. So at this stage, I'm flabbergasted angry and freaked out that someone would do that on a one-way ticket. I finally caved and said that he could stay the night while he sorted everything out, but I expected him to be gone no later than the morning of the day after tomorrow. So I bring him to my place, throw pillows and a blanket on the couch and turn to head to my bedroom, and he asks if he can sleep with me. I'm like, no. No way that's going to happen. So I point out that I have firearms and do not attempt to come in. The next day, I have to work, so I woke him up and told him to get up and find a way home immediately. I also told him that I had to work, but I would check in on his progress because the next morning, I was dropping him off at the airport regardless of whether or not he had to wait back. I went to work and he blew up my phone all day. Wanted me to come back to my place for lunch. Told him that I couldn't and that I was way too busy. I finally got home from work and I'm chuckling at a text that I got about my dog. And that's when I noticed that he had rearranged everything. And by everything, I mean every room of the house had been rearranged. I flipped my lid. I asked him why he thought it was normal to do anything that he did. Instead of answering, he asked me who I had been talking to. I said that it really wasn't any of his business, but I had received a text from the guy watching my dog while I was on vacation. Color me shocked when he says that he doesn't want me to talk to that guy. I'm no longer freaked, but full force apocalyptic disaster is about to be unleashed and leave nothing but a smoking crater. The temperature drops about 10 degrees and I very calmly said to get his stuff, and I was calling a cab to take him to the airport because he's a complete psycho. Side note, full rage had been achieved when it feels like the temperature drops and I speak very calmly. If I'm complaining about something, it's a quick burn. If I go monotone calm and tilt my head to one side slightly, that's where I hit Arctic level anger. So, he unaware of the environmental change that has occurred, and that the chances of survival are dropping by the second, decides to tell me that he used my computer, and got my ex's phone number, and they both agree that I was just heartless. We're fast approaching the epic scale disaster, and he finally seems to notice how deep into rage I had sunk. I told him it was unlikely that he had gotten into my computer, because it's a full quote of a part of The Art of War by Sun Tzu, and that he would have had to have been the processing power of the Hadron Collider computers, and it was obvious that that was not the case. I told him that he had 3 minutes to get his stuff and get out, or I wouldn't be responsible for what would occur. So, still yelling insults at me, he gathered his stuff up and he left. I used to get calls and texts from him. I would block one and 6 more would pop up, but it eventually stopped. To this day, I have no idea, nor interest in knowing where he's at or if he made it back. This happened to me when I was about 14. I was best friends with this girl Robin. We've long since parted ways, but I used to stay over at hers all the time. Robin was an only child to an older couple, both roughly about 60. Her house was old and the bedrooms were quite small. She had a thing for decorating her room and spooky things. It was overcrowded with trinkets and clothes, which looked really cool, but it meant that after we were finished watching trashies and 90s anime, you know, the good stuff, at 4 o'clock in the morning I would go to sleep in the spare bedroom, or I would risk suffocating under a pile of gothic teddy bears and Pokemon on her floor. One evening her parents went to the local pub just down the street with some old friends, so I stayed over. It was great. A free house for just the 2 of us, and they made sure that we had all the junk food that we could want. They were really sweet and always made sure that we felt safe before leaving. I should also mention that they never brought guests home, especially when their daughter had a friend over. For the most part, I had a great night. When it was time to eventually go to sleep, I went into what I called my room because I was there so often. It was small and just fit a wardrobe, a dresser, and a double bed, which, considering I had a single bed and shared a room with my sister, it was luxury. We would usually spend another hour sending each other DS PictoChat messages until one of us fell asleep. I curled up into bed and passed out pretty quick. Sometime around 4 a.m., I think, I awoke to someone fidgeting at the door handle. At first, I was a bit confused as Robin would always almost message me through PictoChat if she was going to come into my room. The door was rattling at this stage and I was a bit freaked. It lasted a couple of minutes, but then the rattling subsided. I rolled over and tried to calm myself down, thinking that it might have been her dad or mom making sure the door was closed. I don't know, I was confused. I'm not sure at this point if I fell asleep or what, but I didn't hear anyone entering the room. And then I hear this splashing sound. I remember thinking it was really loud and clear, and as these seconds went by, I realized this wasn't a part of a dream. This was something I was actually hearing. So, as I was facing the wall, I rolled my head around as silently as I could, and I could see this very tall man next to my bed, facing the corner. He was so close to me. He was tall, at least 6'3", and he had a thick black short haircut, and he was incredibly pale and toned. He looked to be in his early 30s or something, and he was wearing nothing but a pair of black boxers. What in the world? There was no way this could be her dad. While he was almost as tall as this guy, her dad was visibly older, had silver hair, and the top of his head was bald. There was no way anyone could confuse him with this guy. I was in shock. I had no idea what was happening, and I remember feeling my heart in my mouth. I didn't know what to do. I just stared in shock for a couple of seconds and then, as quiet as I could, turned back around and just pretended to be asleep. I remember trying to control my breathing so he wouldn't notice me. Eventually he left, and I was awake for what felt like an hour, too afraid to move. I didn't know who this guy was and if he was still outside my door. Did he see me? If he saw me, what would he do? I didn't hear anyone else in the house. There was no talking, and the walls in this house were paper thin. When I eventually worked up the nerve, I darted into Robin's room and broke down. I was panicking, and she just kept laughing at me, saying I was being ridiculous. I was lying. I was just having a nightmare. She told me to go back to bed, and I refused to go into the room. I didn't feel safe. She rolled her eyes, and we both went into the room. She looked around and suddenly started shrieking. She had just stepped into a puddle of pee. I told you, it was everywhere. It was on the wardrobe, on the dresser, and soaked into the carpet. At that point, she was just as confused as I was. Even so, it was 5 a.m., so she grabbed my pillow and blanket from the room, and I gladly took my chance with the Teddy Avalanche and slept on her floor. The next morning, I remember being incredibly wary of her dad. There was no other male figure around, and they weren't the kind of people to have people over, especially when their daughter had guests over, so I directed my fear and confusion at him. I knew it wasn't him though, but at that point, I was just so anxious around any kind of male figure. I remember sitting around the breakfast table and Robin still wasn't sure what to make of it. Somehow part of her didn't want to believe me, even when she saw the evidence for herself. I didn't say anything to her parents, and neither did she. I went home scared, confused, and out of my friends and family, no one seemed to believe me. It wasn't until recently that I retold the story to a group of friends and my best friend, who I was friends with at the time, and they reacted with, "Wait, that was real? We all thought you were just making it up." Later on, my sister told me that the houses in the area are connected through the attics, and that you can get from one house to another. Maybe somebody crawled through there and gotten in. But why were they almost naked? And did they know that I was there? I never really understood what happened. Needless to say, I never slept in that room and never slept alone in that house ever again. So yeah, person who broke into my room and peed all over the place. I hope I don't see you again. I was just recently reminded of this story by another hitchhiking story on here. My dad used to tell me and my brother all sorts of stories from his youth hitchhiking down the East Coast. There are two that have always really stuck with me, and I figured if you guys like this one, I'll talk about the other one too. When my dad was 15, he left home in Massachusetts and hitchhiked down to Florida, where his older sister was living in Daytona. This event apparently happened on his trip somewhere in Virginia. He had been trying to hitch a ride outside of some city, though he could never remember which one. This happened in '76, and there were a lot of drugs done between then and now. And this really nice car stopped and picked him up. He and the driver get to talking, and the guy tells my dad that he's a surgeon at one of the local hospitals. He gives him a business card and tells him, if he ever needs anything at that hospital, to give them his name. All seems to be going well. and he is apparently heading pretty far south for some family function, so it's a long way that my dad doesn't have to walk. He seems like a nice, professional guy, clean-cut and well-spoken. But then stuff starts to get weird. My dad's exact wording at this part of the story every time that he tells it. The doctor starts giving my dad the side-eye, and seems like he wants to say something but can't quite figure out how to say it. Of course, my dad is just sort of ignoring him because, as he says, I had been on the road for a while and hadn't had a shower or a changing clothes in weeks. Then the guy finally comes out and says it. "Can I suck?" My dad was obviously taken aback by this, and he tells him no. "Please, just a little." "No. I'll give you $50 if you let me do it." "No." "How about you let me see it then? Can I see it?" "No. I think you better let me off here." And surprisingly, without any resistance, the guy does. He pulls off at a rest stop and he lets my dad out. Before he pulls away, he hands my dad that $50 and he tells him, "Sorry about that, man. I hope I didn't blow your mind or anything." This isn't super creepy, but I thought you guys might like it. My dad always says that the guy didn't seem like a bad guy, just really messed up. And honestly sorry to have freaked him out so bad. I have no way of knowing if it is totally true, except that my aunt says my dad told her the same story when he got to Florida just a few weeks later. I'm a 35-year-old female and my story takes place when I was 15, but it feels like yesterday. It was the day that would change my innocent youth forever. I'm from a little village in Ireland with a population of a few hundred. The nearest town is about 10 miles away. Growing up in rural Ireland was very idealistic. Summers were spent playing football with neighbors or going to the lake swimming till the sun went down. I was lucky that even though the population is small and the houses are far apart, that my best friend's house was only down the road. So during those summer months, Mary and I were inseparable. My friend and I grew up with lots of brothers and sisters in a safe village. We were given a lot of freedom and sometimes we were gone all day and only came back before dark. As it was the middle 90s and we had no phones, but our moms knew we would be okay and look out for each other. One thing that we liked to do during these summer months, besides going to the lake and hanging out at each other's houses, was to go to town and look around the shops. The easiest way to get into town was to hitchhike, as there were no buses. Here in Ireland, we call it thumbing. Hardly anyone hitches now because most households have 2 cars and parents are a lot more protective. But back in the 80s and 90s, it was very common. Our parents were okay with it, but there were certain rules that we had to follow. I'm not entirely sure who came up with the rules, but I assume that our parents did. Rule number 1. Never hitch alone. You must thumb with at least 1 or 2 friends. Number 2. Never take a lift if there are 2 or more men in the car, but 2 or more women is fine. Number 3. Never take a lift from someone in a van. There could be more guys hiding in the back or worse, ropes, blindfolds, etc. Number 4. And this was the most important rule. When a car stops to pick you up, always ask the driver where they're going first. If you tell them where you're going first, they could pretend that they're going to the same place to lure you in. We were innocent but had common sense, so we followed the rules down to a T. At least we tried to. My friends Mary and I used to hitch once a week during the summer. We would go to town with a population of only a few thousand and look around the shops, eat ice cream and hang out. When we got a ride, we had to make small talk with the driver and his two shy 15-year-olds. This bit sucked the most. To make it fair, we took turns sitting in the front and did most of the talking. One day, we spent a few hours in town. It was pretty uneventful, so we decided to thumb it back. At around 3 p.m., we went to the usual spot to hitch from, just on the outskirts of town. We were only waiting for about 5 minutes when a white car pulled up. And before we could ask where he was going, he asked us first. My friend told him and he said that he was passing through our village on the way to another one. Rule number 4 broken, but he seemed nice enough and we just wanted to go home. It was my turn to sit in the front. The driver introduced himself as John, a farmer, and was super friendly. He was dressed in a worn t-shirt with holes in it. He had tattered pants and smelled of cow poop. The car was full of bits of straw and was old and battered like the driver. He was about 60, had no wedding ring on. Don't ask me why, but I always noticed these little things. About halfway between town and our home village, he asked if we heard a noise, and we didn't reply. "There it is again. It sounds like a banging noise," he said. I didn't hear anything, so I sat there quietly. "No, I think it might be the exhaust pipe," he said. "I'll have to pull in and have a look." He pulled up on a busy road and went out to take a look. "I didn't hear anything," said Mary. "He seems like a weirdo," I said. Call it intuition, but even though he was super friendly and chatty, I got a bad feeling from him. The next thing, he comes back to the driver's side and tells us that the exhaust is hanging down and it was hitting off the road, and he needs us to help him tie it up. It was then that I noticed that he had a string holding up his pants instead of a belt. I thought this was odd. Anyway, he got some string of the boot, same color string as his belt, and we both got out of the car. Although I got a bad vibe from him, I didn't feel scared at this stage. We were on a busy road and it was only about 3:30 p.m., so we both got out of the car. He showed us the exhaust pipe hanging down and used a rag to hold it up because it was hot. My friend Mary took over holding it up, while he secured it with the string. They were both kneeling while I just stood back and watched. It was then that I noticed his fly was open, and I could see his privates, and he was clearly not wearing any underwear. He didn't even have a belt, so I guess I wasn't too surprised. In my head I thought, "Oh my gosh, what is going on? Crap, but I said nothing. I just stood there in shock. Mary hadn't noticed at this stage and just continued to hold the pipe. When John was standing up, he noticed his fly was open and acted all shocked. "Oh girls, I'm sorry and embarrassed. I only have a safety pin holding the fly together and it must have come off. Please forgive me and get back in the car." Mary was stunned and got a close-up on his privates, which left me to do the talking. I told him that it was okay and that it was an accident, so we got back in the car. He fastened the safety pin even though I didn't see him look for it. All was hidden again. Back in the car, the atmosphere was very different. We both felt mortified and he kept apologizing over and over. I looked out the passenger window and just repeated, "It's okay, it's okay." Then he said something that turned my stomach. "Oh well, girls, you had taken it very well. If I didn't know any better, I would swear that you liked it." And then he nudged me in the arm with his arm, like you do to a friend. I looked at him through the corner of my eye, my face still facing the window, when I noticed that his fly was undone again, and that he was exposed again. He must have noticed me looking because he said, "Oh, the safety pin keeps opening, just don't look." Fine by me, I thought, but I said okay and continued to look out the window. He kept nudging me and saying, don't be looking," giggling at the same time. He was doing this in a playful way, like it was all a joke. Mary started giggling too, because when she's nervous, she laughs. I knew it wasn't her fault, but I was getting angry at this stage. He wouldn't stop telling me to stop looking. And then he said, "Your friend is laughing, she must be enjoying the view." And this made her laugh even harder. Now remember, we're both polite 15-year-olds that always respect our elders and are a little shy, so I would never speak up to an adult. The nudging in my arm and my friend laughing was all getting to be too much. He asked if it was the first Willie that I had ever seen, and told me once again to stop looking. I was turned, facing the passenger window, so much so that I had my back to him. There was no way that I could be looking. I lost my temper. I shouted at the top of my voice, "I'm not looking. Mary, shut up and stop laughing." Silence followed. He said that he was sorry and that he was only joking, and there was no need to be so serious. I said nothing and sat there, red with temper. I should have told him to let us out. I should have told him to cover himself up, the dirty old guy. But I was in shock too, and part of me wanted to believe it was all an innocent mistake. We finally arrived at our tiny, safe little village. We got out and he said again that he was sorry about the whole thing. My friend got her voice back and assured him that it was okay. I said that it was all okay and it was nothing to worry about. I said thanks for the lift. What he said back sickened me. He looked me up and down with this creepy smile and said, "No girlies, thanks for everything," and he drove off. We were left speechless. We sat down on a nearby bench to process all of this before going home. We made a deal that we wouldn't tell our parents there that they would never let us hitchhike again. My friend finally got her voice back and repeated, "What a weirdo, smelly old guy. He had this plan the whole time," over and over. About 5 minutes after sitting down on the bench, who drives by going the direction that we just came from? You guessed it, little old guy Farmer John, waving and smiling while we sat there stunned. He had beeped to catch our attention, so much for passing through our village. A few months later, and the ordeal went to the back of my mind. Occasionally, we would talk about Farmer John, but we made jokes about it and we told some of our friends about what had happened. One day, I told a friend of mine named Brid. A cousin of hers had told her a very similar story. The cousin lived in another village about 20 miles in the other direction from town. She was only a few years older than us. While hitchhiking home one day, the same thing happened to her and her friend. The exhaust, the safety pin, and the undone fly. It was no accident, and my worst fears were confirmed. Farmer John really was a weirdo. I was on a hitchhiking adventure from BC, Canada to Antigua, Guatemala, which started in September 2019. This post is taken from the notes in my journal, which I wrote as soon as I could after this insane experience. If you've ever hitchhiked before, you know how amazing it is and how many cool people that you can meet. Out of the thousands of rides across 40 countries, I've only had 2 bad or dangerous encounters at thumbing it. This was my second one. I was taking a break from traveling to find some lawn work in California's Nevada City, a beautiful little town with a very interesting crowd, but got stuck a few towns over for not getting a ride all day. I ended up sleeping a night at the Love's gas station, which I had done plenty of times before. I've slept on worse places. At least Love's has a bathroom. In the morning, I was a little more desperate to accept rides because no one was stopping and it had already been a whole day. I just wanted to get out of there. A pickup truck is speeding past me and slams the brakes ahead, and then slowly backs up. Inside is a man and a woman in their late 50s, and he says in a husky voice, "Where you heading, boy?" "Nevada City. Any distance helps." "We'll get in, we're going to Yuba." They seemed normal enough, even without most of their teeth and hair, so I jumped in. It all happened in rapid succession. 1, I toss my bag into the back and jump in. 2. I shut the door. 3. I notice a pile of guns and bullets on the floor. And 4. Before I have time to rethink my decision, we speed off. So, as I'm trying to assess whether or not I'm in danger, they start telling me how this guy got out of jail for aggravated assault and how he beat the crap out of that guy so bad that he can't think straight no more. And they both laugh. She's holding his seatbelt over his chest and they both smell awful. And they start asking how much money I have. I think, yep, I'm not safe here. After hitchhiking all this way, I don't look very wealthy. I'm filthy and I need a shower. I look no different than the stereotypical homeless guy. So I try to seem more poor than I am, and more tough than I am too. Man, I'm broke as heck, man. That's why I'm going to the city. I'm hoping to make some cash trimming. The man looks me in the eye. Well, you'll find it alright, you'll find it good. Don't be afraid to do no dirty work. If people try, and they'll try to screw you, you screw them first, you get what I'm saying? Put your eyes on the road, Jesus Christ. The woman points forward and he swerves back to the right lane. He asks me if I smoke, and knowing that California has legalized it, I put 2 and 2 together. He's offering me some, so I say yeah, I smoke. With a wild look in his eyes, he exclaims, "Great," and we turn off the highway and start down a dirt road. I'm more than worried, and I look behind us. In the back of the truck is my bag, a chainsaw, a pickaxe, and a plastic tarp over something. It didn't help with my anxiety. Finally, we stop in front of a clearing, and the woman doesn't take out a joint but a pipe. It's the first time I've seen one of these pipes, and a lot of things start to make sense. While he lights up and exhales into the car, I've never seen smoke so white. Rolling down the window as fast as possible because I don't want to breathe that stuff in. The woman takes some as well, and they tell me how they were going to collect money that a woman owes them. That dang lady is gonna pay today or one way or another. Yeah, she better have the money. I'm gonna grab her and say, "Where's my money?" Oh, she'll have it alright. She'll have it or else. You say, son, you ever steal something? 'Cause we could make like 20K today. I don't know how exactly to answer this guy, and he repeats, $20,000 today. Here, smoke some of this. And he hands me the pipe. There's nothing like it, ain't that right? I gently reject it and say that it isn't really my thing, which he surprisingly takes well, and smokes some more before putting it away and driving off back towards the highway. Now his driving is terrible, swerving, speeding, hitting brakes abruptly. Then he starts trying to convince me to help him steal some weed plants. You hold my gun and I'll drill the hole, and I'll keep a lookout. Yeah, baby girl, we'll keep a look. Now you gotta be careful if you hear the dogs because them sons of guns are nasty. Nasty, I tell ya. You see this bite? And he reveals what looks like a terrible scar on his arm. I didn't really know how to get out of this situation, so I sounded as confident as possible and said that I was meeting a friend to look for work together and they would be expecting me today. We neared the end of Yuba City where they pulled over to the side. Well, it's your funeral, you don't want to eat. Fine by me, but if we ever want that cash, you just call me. And he hands me his phone number. Heck no, I think. Hey, thanks, I will. Quickly retrieving my bag and smiling nervously. The woman says with a wave, Take care now, God bless. And they speed off. I'm standing on the side of the road thinking, what in the world was that? And I'm happy to be out of that car. So one Sunday afternoon, I was waiting at the bus stop alone after an outing with a friend to the mall. The bus stop that I was at was the final stop for all buses, so there were many buses coming and going and staying. I saw a bus driver get onto a bus and I asked him if he was A14. He said that he wasn't going to be driving, so I said okay and waited patiently for my bus. A few minutes later, I saw him get onto a bus, but he made eye contact with me. I think. He was wearing sunglasses at the time. And then he gestured with his hand to come to him. So, me trying to be nice and a kind person, I did just that. He told me to take off my mask because he couldn't understand me when I had it on. He then proceeded to tell me how beautiful I am and how I was such a rare beauty, and how he's never seen anyone as beautiful as me before, and who gave me these gleaming eyes, etc. Now, I am used to guys who are significantly older than me hitting on me, because I am well aware that I'm pretty, and that I look 18. So I generally like to inform them that I'm 15, and they tend to leave me alone after that. But this guy, he didn't seem to care one bit that I had just turned 15, and continued to flirt even though he was at 26. He proceeded to make inappropriate comments and kept looking at my chest. He was only about my height, and I'm only about 5 feet tall. After 10 minutes of conversation, he asked me about my SEX life, and I had enough so I texted my mom to call me. I talked to my mom for the rest of the bus ride, and when I was on the phone with her, I was getting off the bus and he grabbed a hold of my hand. I luckily yanked it away from him, and I got off feeling sick. I went to the police station to report it, and I had to do a confrontation. Basically, they brought him in with zero warning, and I had to tell him, confront him, and he argued like a 7-year-old, and I got him to confess in only 6 minutes. Regardless, the guy was a weirdo.